Welcome back to The Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited. This is Kate. There's a well-known and well-loved quote from Fred Rogers. When I was a boy and would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." I think many of us have grasped onto this lesson, especially in recent years, in no small part because when we focus on the helpers, the good that we see around us, it effectively minimizes fear and worry. Scary things capture our attention with very little effort, so finding a way to break their hold that is effective and lasting can be so beneficial for our energy, mental well-being, and the ability to respond to the troubles and challenges around us. This is not to say that we should ignore the scary things, but as today's guest reminds me, that's not the whole story. She and Mr. Rogers' mother are right. See the scary things, and then look for where kindness is happening. Sarah Browning founded Time for Kindness in 2021 as a means of spreading and sharing stories about the kindness that already exists in the world and workplace. What began as a way to connect with good things has grown into a community of kindness ambassadors and a well-being program grounded in the idea that when we see kind, we can be kind. When I saw Sarah's job title, I knew I had to invite her to the Comfy Chairs. Because after all, who doesn't want to talk to a kindness cheerleader? Welcome to the Comfy Chairs, Sarah. As I've shared, I like to give my guests an opportunity to introduce themselves, so please take a moment for that.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for having me. We were just saying before we came on air, weren't we, excited about this conversation? So yeah, it's great to be with you today. So yeah, my name is Sarah Browning, and I am a kindness cheerleader, and I run something called the Time for Kindness Wellbeing Program. And that is, I'm a communications consultant, communications professional by training. And I also now run this new program, which is all about inspiring and teaching people to notice the kindness that already exists in the world. Because despite what the mainstream media in particular would have us believe, there is a lot of kindness. We just don't talk about it enough yet. And so I've set up this program, which is all about sharing these stories. That's where my communication background comes in. And also running workshops to teach people the habits to notice what is there, because there are habits that you can bring into your life and into your workplace and in whatever context you're in, to get that benefit for yourself of seeing the kindness that's there.
I have a decal on my desk that says "Choose Kind," and so when I saw your kindness cheerleader title, I'm like, I've got to talk to this woman. I'm so excited to have this opportunity to talk about something that is just so important. I don't even have the right words to talk about how foundational, elemental, like subatomic level kindness in the world is needed, and particularly in the workplace and leadership. So where I'd like to... Oh, go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say, I agree. I think you're right. It is, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think people often dismiss kindness as something that's a bit weak, a bit fluffy. But I completely disagree with that. I think it is powerful. And the reason I think it's powerful is because it connects us as human beings. And, you know, yes, we need more in the world. There's always room for more, isn't there? But there is a lot of it there already. Yeah. And that, I think, is where my starting point has come in, because sometimes the kind of choosing kindness can feel, particularly if you think, oh, am I going to be, called out as being weak or fluffy or whatever, that can feel a big step. And noticing the kindness that is there already can be a step towards that, so sort of to help you get more used to seeing what's there.
This is a little bit off script, if you will, but I think that's talking about the strength that underpins kindness is really important right now. We're about 1 or 2 weeks out from Mark Zuckerberg making his masculine energy comments.
Yeah.
And while I typically try to stay away from current events or politics, it is so damaging to make that sort of distinction between, well, one, feminine and masculine, but also treating things like kindness as problematic. Again, particularly in work, because that leaks into our culture in ways.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I necessarily want us to go down the defining feminine, defining masculine, any of the gender politics there, but it is, we have, I think as a society, one of the things that we've drifted off of is really understanding what is strong and what that means for how we treat people.
Yeah, I agree. And we have, I'm based over here in the UK, and I think we have similar issues
Mm-hmm.
around that.
Yeah.
But what I think is, I think one of the reasons, so I've been running the program for 4-ish years now,
Mm-hmm.
and it came about kind of late 2020, early 21, when, like a lot of us, I was thinking, what on earth just happened there?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in the world, and what can I do to sort of bring something, important to me, to the world? And so since that point, that was the point at which I thought, do you know what? Kindness is really important to me. And more than that, I believe there is a lot there. And at
Mm-hmm.
that point, it was really just my own kind of belief, if you like. And I was, very much in that position of thinking, oh, is this going to be a bit embarrassing if I start talking about this, particularly if I start talking about this in a work context and I'm on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn and I talk about, kindness and those kinds of words. But what I found is, well, a couple of things really. One, the more braver I have got to
Mm-hmm.
explicitly the language of kindness, more and more people have responded positively to that and are starting to use it. And also what I've discovered is that there is a lot of, and an increasing body of, academic research out there
Yes.
that shows actually it's not just somebody or some of us kind of having this belief that might be a bit unsubstantiated. Increasingly there's a body of research that shows just how powerful kindness is, how positive it is, what difference it is making. So some of these kind of grand proclamations we get from, and you've named a name there, and there are others,
Yeah.
some of that stuff, it just isn't true. Actually, that is their belief or their view of the world
Yeah.
that isn't always backed up. So I think for me there is something in terms of kind of kindness, as I say, particularly in a workplace context, of naming it for what it is, and being more explicit about that, has in itself a positive effect.
Yeah. Words matter. They just do. That's one of the very first guests I had way back when I started the podcast in 23. We talked about, she was also a communication professional executive, and we talked about how our words matter and we have to choose them carefully, we have to define them clearly, and then we have to use them consistently. And the that struggle with, if I talk about kindness, um, is it going to undermine the message, really resonates with me, because my central message is leadership is love. It is a love story to be a great
Yeah.
leader. And people get a little weird about talking about love at work, because we don't define it appropriately, I think.
Yeah.
But I have made the choice to say love and not kindness or not care or any of the other words that sometimes come into that conversation, for the very reason that it does disrupt a little bit.
Yeah.
Plus, I like the irony of love being disruptive.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And again, it is about connections, isn't it? And
Mm-hmm.
relationships between people. And in a workplace, unless you happen to be doing something that's incredibly lone, most of us are working with, for others,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a collective endeavor, or at least it should be. And I think that kind of can lead on to a conversation about success, can't it? And how do you define success? And
Really?
actually,
Yeah.
for me, that working together is a huge part of success, because actually we achieve more
Mm-hmm.
together. So, and we achieve more and over a longer period of time, actually, as
Yeah.
well. It's sort of more consistent to keep going.
I think we're going to be able to pull that in as our conversation continues, Sarah. So I'm going to make a note about kindness and success in my pages, but I want to bring us back to kind of where we started. We need to define when we say kind, what do we mean? And then you've made a distinction between noticing kindness and practicing it. So I'd like to sketch this out. What do we mean when we say kind or kindness? What is the difference between noticing and being? And then why start with the one rather than the other?
Yeah. It's so in terms of that definition piece, um I think it's fascinating. So one of the things I do is I run workshops
Mhm.
and teach people habits to notice kindness. And obviously, as you say, we need to be clear on what we're talking about. So we start the workshops by talking about kind of how would you define kindness? What is the definition of kindness? Let's kind of all get on the same page, as it were. And the truth is, there is no single definition of kindness. I have various ones that I use at various points in different workshops. But essentially, what I've noticed is that whilst there isn't a sort of a single, this is the one we all agree with, this is the absolute definitive definition, there are common strands. So they all tend to have an element of action in them. So kindness is an act. Kindness is something that you do. There is such a thing as kind thoughts, of course there is, but that's a slightly separate thing. But yeah, kindness is active. So you are doing something for someone else or for yourself, actually.
Mm.
Um, there is usually an element of positivity. So the thing that you are doing is causing some kind of positive impact. And kindness is a positive, leads to positive outcomes, again, for someone else, might be for yourself, probably both. And in fact, it is also not just the two, the kind of the giver and receiver of the kindness, anyone who sees it also has a positive impact on them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third element often comes up is about intention. And it is about that sort of what was the intent, and that there is usually some kind of positive intent in terms of what you are, how you are choosing to act. So I've really broken it down there. I don't know if that's actually ended up defining it or not,
I
really.
I think so. I think it is an act that is intended to create a positive impact.
Yeah, perfect.
There you go. You've done it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the wonderful thing is it has the potential to be mutual.
yes, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think when I can't now remember off the top of my head, but one of the definitions I often use is the kindness is when you do something for someone else that you don't have to do, because it will cause a positive
Mm-hmm.
outcome for them. And so I think there is that element of choice as well, that comes into that one.
Why noticing versus practicing?
I think for me personally, it was because I am a communicator. So initially, my thought process was kind of recognizing kindness as something that I believe in and that I think is important and that I believe there is a lot of, but we don't talk about enough yet. And then from there, I thought, okay, well, if that's the case, what can I do about it? What can I
Mm-hmm.
bring to the party, as it were? And because I'm a communicator and I've worked for a long time as a communications consultant, I thought, well, what I can do is I can tell stories. So actually, that's a good place for me to start by sharing stories and amplifying these examples of everyday kindness. And I'll be honest, for the first year or so, I was really just playing at it. My daughter, who I think was something like 13 at the time, taught me how to use Instagram because I'd never used it before. And then I spent that first year kind of just playing at it, really, and fine. Noticing kindness comes quite naturally to me. So I was seeing a lot of stories and I was popping them up on my website and on my social media. And then I got to a point where I thought, actually, people are responding really positively to this. and the words that kept coming up were people said it made them feel positive and it made them feel hopeful in a world that wasn't always giving us that and still doesn't always give us that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that again was for me a sign that yeah, I'm on the right lines here. This is something that is important. It needs to be done, and so that's how it's continued really. And as I say, the sharing of stories that has remained the kind of one of the strands of the program. I now run workshops because what became apparent was, whilst as I say, it mostly comes naturally to me to notice this stuff. It isn't easy every day, and it's not easy to everybody either. Not everyone is quite so naturally predisposed, I suppose, to notice. So I thought, well, actually, what can I do in that then? Then I can teach them these habits that are not particularly complicated, not difficult, but again, like most habits, it's the question of practicing them, isn't it, and learning them. And what I have always said is that whilst I am not in the business of teaching anyone to be kind, I'm teaching them to see kind. I think being kind is probably a byproduct. I think that
Yeah.
people are probably seeing the stories and thinking, oh, I could do that. There's certainly, and it comes up, it's come up in conversation, people who are thinking, oh, I do that. I've just never thought of it as kindness before. I thought it was just good manners. It was just doing my job. It was just how I've been brought up, those kinds of
Yeah.
things. And actually, that's probably true as well. But my feeling is it doesn't have to be either or. It can be doing your job and be kindness. It can be
I
good
agree.
manners and be kindness.
Yeah.
And really, if we accept that noticing kindness gives us this positive and hopeful boost, why don't we label it kindness anyway?
Right. I think I love the logic of teaching people to notice as opposed to teaching people to be, because of how individual acts of kindness are, both the giver and the receiver.
Yeah.
And by looking, it is a way of learning.
Yes.
So there is a great logic to this, Sarah, that I find really appealing, and it almost makes it easier entry for people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
I want to make a change. I want to be more like this. Let me go and observe.
Yeah.
In nursing, there's a see one, do one, be one, right? Or
Yeah.
teach one,
Yeah.
depending. And
Yes.
it's, you know, you're starting with that. Go and watch and see what feels comfortable to you. And then, because you're seeing it and it's attractive and it's hopefully not scary or too scary, there's no barrier to doing it. That's wonderful. That makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense to me. Makes a
Yeah.
lot of
Thank
sense
you.
to me
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
I will admit initially I was like, well, noticing is nice, but what about actually stepping into the fray and being? And now I can see, oh, of course you start with watching. We start with our sight essentially, and then we can move to doing more
Yeah. Yeah.
naturally. Wonderful.
Yeah. And I think what it's doing as well is it's helping to get past um, that fear of action, but also again that fear of, well, perhaps it's a bit embarrassing,
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps it's not something I should get involved in because I'm going to be showing myself as weak or whatever. But if you're observing kindness, you're noticing kindness, you are going to be seeing a heck of a lot of it. And so actually that also helps you then to realize, actually, this isn't as embarrassing or weak because look at all these people that are doing it. Look at all
Mm-hmm.
the stuff that's going on. And I won't be a kind of a lone voice that will get shot down for this wacky idea I've had or whatever. So I think that helps as well, just in terms of, and I guess to some extent, that was my starting point, was really a sense of stubbornness that I have, that it's blooming well there. And I hate that we don't hear about it enough. And I hate I hate it. I worry about the narrative we get sold by particularly our mainstream media, but also certain sections of social media and so on, that the world is awful and we're all awful, and it's just getting worse, because that isn't the only story. I mean, I'm not, neither am I in the business of toxic positivity. So I'm not
Thank you.
saying let's ignore that negative stuff. Clearly, there is some awful stuff that goes on near and far from home. But what I'm saying is that's not the only story. And if we're not careful, we do end up believing it and it becomes a downward spiral. Whereas we need to rebalance this story with all the great positive stuff that's happening, all the kind people, all the amazing kind leaders, all of that stuff, so that we can go, actually, yeah, that's who we are. That's who
Mhm.
most of us are. Yes, there is this other stuff as well, but most of us are over there.
It's interesting to me. You talked about media and social media, and those, I think those sit at these very unhealthy ends of the spectrum where mainstream media, quote unquote, does tend to be highly negative, sensational. You know, if it bleeds, it leads. Social media, highly curated to show perfection.
Yeah.
Everything is filtered, literally and figuratively. And what I hear you saying and advocating for is if we focus on things like kindness, we are focusing on reality
Yeah.
and we are telling the real story. I'd like to go on to that next prepared question because I think this is where we can start to pull in some of this conversation about strength and success as well, is the role that kindness plays in making connection, particularly in the workplace.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I so when I run my workshops, we kind of do the defining bit, but then we do talk about some of the the evidence and the proof and the kind of why does it matter? And actually, there are some interesting studies that have been done in a workplace setting, which might be quite useful to mention here. So the first one is that there was a study by the Harvard Business Review, and they showed that leaders who expressed kindness in the course of their work and their leadership, they found having difficult conversations, such as providing uncomfortable feedback, that kind of thing, they found that easier than leaders who were not regularly practicing kindness. And the reason for that was that they had built relationships with their teams and with the people that they had to have these difficult conversations with. And what that doesn't mean is that those leaders were shying away from difficult conversations, giving difficult
Mm-hmm.
feedback, holding people accountable. It's not that they were kind, so they were being nice, which is something very different. It just meant they had a much more solid relationship to build that difficult conversation on. So I thought that one was quite interesting.
That one
Um,
gets me really excited because my stance and my teaching is that feedback is an act of compassion,
yeah, absolutely.
particularly
Yeah,
constructive feedback.
yes,
That
yeah,
I care enough that I'm going to tell you something difficult because I want better for you.
yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And it's about how you deliver that feedback as
Right?
well, isn't it? You don't pile in on somebody. Somebody once said to me, "Oh, yeah, but what about the cruel to be kind?" I've got no time for that at
No,
all.
no.
I don't stand by that at all. It is about how you deliver that kind of feedback. And the accountability thing is interesting as well, isn't it? Because um the holding, as you said, kind of it is an act of compassion, and the kind of holding someone accountable. If you're not holding them accountable, actually you're setting them up to fail. You're letting them, be in that difficult position. You're not either being kind to the people around them, because typically what will happen within a team setting, if somebody is not performing, is not doing their job, then others will pick it up and will pick up the slack. So actually there isn't a kindness to them. So that kind of making it really clear what objectives people have, kind of what the expectations are, what you're all working towards. I think it's Brene Brown, isn't it, who talks about clarity is kindness, or
Yeah, she
something
does. She
like
does.
that.
And I have to smile because I have a whole series of soapboxes about accountability and how that
Yeah,
has become um, really a misused, a miswielded concept, particularly at work.
Yeah.
If your focus is on holding people accountable, you are too late.
Yeah.
You have to create accountability up front. You have to put the effort in, be kind, demonstrate love, be effective by making certain people understand this is the expectation. And then
Yeah.
everything that flows after that happens in that mutual accountability relationship. And if you're the leader, you are demonstrating that you care about that person's success when you do things like give critical or constructive feedback, and
Yeah.
when you deliver positive or negative consequences as well.
Yeah.
You can trust me to do what I say I will do. And
Yeah.
like you said, it's not just the employee who may be the focus of that. The entire team is watching, and they're
Yeah.
trying to understand how is the leader going to act when we do a great job, and how is the leader going to act when we're struggling.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you use the word trust there,
Mm-hmm.
and that's so much of it, isn't it? That is so much at the heart of effective relationships in any
Exactly.
context, actually, but particularly in a work context. And actually, if they're watching and they're seeing that if somebody slips up, or
Mm-hmm.
something happens and they get treated badly, then they're not going to trust you. And what they're going to do is, when they slip up, they're not going to tell you. They're
Right.
going, or they're not going to try, even try to get to a point where they think they might. There's a whole, raft of
Mm-hmm.
consequences, isn't there, because of a lack of trust.
Yeah, we're definitely in the space of psychological safety too
Yeah.
here. And this is the kindness doesn't mean nice. You don't have to be a sickly sweet nice guy or girl or other to be kind. You can be direct. Again, it's what's your intention, and are you trying to have a positive impact? Um, because psychologically safe teams, they say the hard things, but they say them because they want the best for each other and whatever the work is.
Yeah, we were talking about the kind of relationships in the psychological safety, and again, I think there's I've not got sort of any particular references to hand, but I know that there are studies that are being done in that space as well, to
Mm-hmm.
show the kind of difference that makes, not just in terms of the individual, but for the organization, the business as a whole. Because I think that's the other thing in terms of kindness in a workplace setting. Yes, it's good and positive for the individual, but actually it is also very positive and the right thing to do for the business and
Yes.
for the success of the business. And another one of the studies that I have got a note of here was done in Canada, where they found that in organizations or businesses where kind behaviors were encouraged, there was a 20% performance improvement in those businesses compared to the organizations where the kindness wasn't encouraged and wasn't happening. I mean, that's a massive difference. So, you know, clearly it's not just a personal benefit. There's a competitive advantage to it as well if you nail that kindness in your culture.
It is so it's so hard to understand why, with all the mountains of evidence around how humane, empathetic, kind, compassionate, loving, whatever word you want to use there, but how that type of behavior, environment, and leadership has such a positive impact, and yet it is not the standard.
Yeah.
Where is the gap for people? And I think I know where it is. I think the gap is generated by fear more
Yeah.
than anything. Um, that's why we see command and control. That's why we see more dictatorship in some leadership. That's why we see lack of transparency or vulnerability, is it's driven by fear. And I think kindness is one of the solutions to that. Now, we may be in this unfortunate do loop where if somebody is afraid and doesn't think kindness is going to resolve, they may not be able to make that switch. But if there's a swell of people around them that are noticing and becoming kind, maybe that'll have the right impact.
Yeah.
I'm talking
I
a
mean,
lot. What do you think?
yeah, I think my own entirely unscientific view um, is it comes back again to that piece about the stories that we tell and the leaders that we talk about and the examples that we see. And so if you know, if I'm a leader, and particularly I think if you're new to leadership and you're trying to figure out kind of what does that mean, what does that look like, what do I need to do to be a leader, you know, you're going to look around, aren't you, really, and go,
Mm-hmm.
well, who's doing it, and who are the leaders, and what are they doing, and who's, and it's that word again, success. You know, who's being a successful leader. And if all that you can see are the kind of doom and gloom, what I call the kind of scary monster model of leadership, then even if that's not how you want to lead or how you would perhaps naturally lean towards leading, you're going to think, oh, that's how you're supposed to do it. That's even
Mm-hmm.
if, and it's that kind of cognitive bias, isn't it, where we're looking for the evidence to prove what we want to believe. Actually, that's also true if you're thinking, well, what I need to believe here is that those are successful, then that's what I need to do. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think if the people around you and the stories that you see and the examples are different and are kind leaders that are also commercially successful, and they are out there, we just don't talk about them,
Yeah.
then that starts to shift that mindset as well, to go, oh, okay, so that's what I can do. That's how I can lead and be successful.
Yeah. It's the stories we choose at the end of the day.
Yes.
And personally, because choose kindness is the phrase I see every day. If I'm choosing a story, let me choose a kind one.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to be on my Time for Kindness program on the story sharing side in the next kind of month or two. I'm
Wonderful.
conscious I'm going to have a campaign to show more kind leaders because they are out there.
Yes.
We just need to talk about them more. So again, it's that thing. Well, what can I do about this? If I think this is a problem in the world, I'm not going to change it for everybody. But what's the little thing I can do? And that's something that I'm going to be
Yeah.
doing.
I'd like to, we've talked a bit about business, the success rates, the 20% more productive, which I'm guessing also tells us more about engagement. It also can tell us more about well being at work. And I know you focus on well being too. So what have you seen and what have you studied about the impact of kindness on our well being?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, when I started the Time for Kindness program, what has become the Time for Kindness Wellbeing program, I was just talking about stories and so on, and what I found was that people were responding very positively and saying, "Oh, I've seen what you're doing. I really like that." And when I started to explore with them more what it was that they liked about it, the words that did keep coming up were positivity and hope, and as really as straightforward as, you know, people have said to me things like, it has changed my view of the world
Hmm.
because I can see that this kindness is out there and that these positive things are happening. And so just at that kind of fairly gut level, I suppose, seeing these examples of kindness appears to be making people feel better, and actually, you know, even if it's they feel better for a little while they've read those stories, you know, over time, even looking for those stories and reading those stories becomes a habit. And so that kind of positive feeling, it doesn't necessarily, you know, well, it doesn't automatically kind of fix lots of things, but it just makes you feel better. And one of the studies that I talk about that I really like in this space, there's a researcher called Dr. Catherine Buchanan, who's based at the University of Essex over here in the UK, and she did some research so going back a few years now, we've had some terrorist attacks,
Mm,
Ariana Grande concert
that's right.
here in Manchester, and Catherine did some research where she showed one group of people footage of around the terrorist attacks, and then she had another group that she showed that footage, but she also showed them the footage of people who helped and the medical professionals and all sorts of other people that got involved and helped. And what she found was that the people who had seen the helpers as well, they reported far fewer negative emotions, and they felt more positive about the world in general. And again, on the one hand, I think, yeah, that seems like it would be obvious to me, but it isn't obvious to everybody. And so I think there's that kind of well-being aspect of kind of how you feel. And actually, if you feel better, you can do amazing things in the world. It's really hard to do things if you're feeling down, you're feeling, overwhelmed by everything. So I think it's part of resilience, I guess, isn't it? Really, is having those kind of positive things that you can use as tools in your own kind of well-being toolbox. Again, not from a toxic positivity, you always have to do this point of view, but just something you can choose to do and to kind of support your own well-being and your own feelings in that moment.
The very first definition that you gave of kindness is that it is an act. It is also a choice.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, I think, the difference between toxic positivity, which is just glossing over all of the things and not being willing to look at what might be negative in the world. It's when I see the negative, not if, but when, how do I choose to act? How do I choose to respond? And what you're telling us, what the research is highlighting, is that there is what can be called a virtuous cycle that happens. That I see kindness, I feel positive or better impacted in a way for good because of that. That changes how I feel. It changes the way I view things. I can act kind then as a result.
Yeah.
And that cycle can continue. Very much like gratitude.
Yeah.
There are studies that show us that gratitude has as much, if not more, impact on the person expressing it as the person receiving it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's, I mean, the science, I'm not a scientist.
No, neither
myself,
am I.
but
we can study.
As I understand it, the science of all that also shows that kindness and I think gratitude is the same. But the release of oxytocin, which is the happy hormone, I think they sometimes call it, don't they?
It is.
And how that has that positive impact. But what I was interested to find was I also came across a study that showed that oxytocin then causes the release of another chemical, which is called nitric oxide. And that dilates blood vessels. So actually what that means is kindness is good for your blood pressure.
It is.
Carrying it out and seeing it and all of those things. So I was like, well, that's really interesting, because I talk a lot about the emotional side of it and how you feel and those kinds of things. But to find that there's that evidence of the kind of physical positive impact is also, I mean, again, why would you not want that?
Well, and oxytocin is not just the happy chemical, it's also a chemical that creates a feeling of bonding.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, they've done studies that show that petting your dog releases oxytocin in both participants, the human and the canine, and that's one of the reasons that we can feel so connected to our pets. There's no evidence yet that cats experience oxytocin that way, but we do, which says a lot about our relationships to cats. But that pet relationship points a finger toward when we do something. And I'm not saying go out and pet people. I mean, you can if you want. See what happens.
Permission first.
Yes, right. But that we develop more connection. So something happens in us physically, it's good for our blood pressure, it's good for our mental state. And I think a fast way, it's a little bit sloppy, but a fast way to talk about it is also good for our spirit. So our hearts, our minds, our bodies, and our essence, our inner self, are all benefited when we see or we do these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it's very appealing. It's very
Yeah.
appealing too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's a lot of people, isn't there, that is appealing to, particularly now. There are a lot of people that are looking for something different than the typical kind of narrative or the kind of traditional way
Mm-hmm.
of operating. Um, Certainly, it feels to me that there is a kind of a more of a swell of people talking about kindness, talking about these kinds of things in all sorts of contexts. And for me, there's something about that kind of responsibility to kind of keep the momentum going.
Well, I think this is where the idea about kindness being strength and bravery um, comes into the conversation. That when you are choosing it in the face of not kind or in the face of scary, um, there has to be courage present for that,
Yeah,
because we're not wired to put ourselves at risk, and even if it's offering help shouldn't feel risky. It's horrible that it does, um, but when you face risk, like being the person to speak up, being someone who will enter the literal or proverbial burning building to help someone else, that act of courage, not everybody's able to get over the barrier of fear there.
yeah,
I feel like there's giving kindness and grace to people who aren't always kind. If we can understand that fear motivates so much of what we do,
yeah,
it's one of the balms that we can offer. Like, this person didn't behave the way I would want them to. Let me be kind in the face of that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it isn't always the easy choice
No.
at all. And for some of us, we are lucky enough, privileged enough to be in a position to offer that in a way
Mm-hmm.
that others aren't always. So there's a whole load of kind of layers to it, and kind of it is quite complicated,
It is.
as well as being quite simple.
Yes.
On the
Right.
one hand, it doesn't have to be complicated, but on the other hand, we're human beings, aren't we? We're all kind of multi-layered, and,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be a bit messy. But I think one of the kindest things that you can do is listen to other people, and genuinely listen in terms of what they are saying and the words that they are using, but also what they're not saying
Mm-hmm.
in the kind of body language or the way they act, and those kinds of things. And I think that aspect of kindness is often overlooked,
Mm-hmm.
actually, but it can be incredibly powerful.
I want to I want to ask you a little bit about sort of the where to start, some of the habits that you support. I don't want to ask you to like give up all of your secrets, but if there's a listener who's saying, I want more of this, I want to be more kind. Um, you talked about listening, uh, which seems pretty straightforward. But what are some of the other things that you advocate for?
Well, so one of them actually, and it's possibly even the place to start, is to be kind to yourself. Because I think it's much easier to notice things in other people and to act in a way to other people if you're experiencing it yourself. And being kind to yourself looks very different for different people. So,
Mm-hmm.
it might be reading a good book, having a bubble
Yes.
bath, or something like that. It might be that. It might be spending more time with the people you love, spending less time with the people who drag you down. It might be finding ways to deal with that little voice in your head that tells you you're not good enough.
Yeah.
That there's a whole range of things that might be being kind to yourself, and there is no right or wrong, but it's kind of finding what works for you, and things things you enjoy doing. So actually, one of the ways I am, my kind of go-to, if you like, of being kind to myself is I create art.
Oh,
So I get the paper and paints out and spend some time,
love it.
just losing myself in that.
Hmm.
So it's kind of whatever works for you, but that can be, and it might sometimes feel as if, well, that's being a bit self-indulgent, and actually, is that really the right place to start? But I very much think it is, because
Hmm.
it puts you in a better frame of mind, and as I say, it helps you to notice kindness around you if you're experiencing it yourself, or act
Hmm.
in a kind way to others if you've experienced it yourself. So it's a powerful starting point.
There's a really great symmetry in what you're talking about here. The start with yourself, and you can start with listening. What are the stories I tell myself about myself?
Yeah, yeah,
And becoming aware, and then being willing to step in and intervene on behalf of yourself with that little
yeah,
voice, or voices, depending on how harsh you can be for yourself.
yeah,
Um, then starts to create the circumstances where you're able to do more,
yeah.
willing to do more, wanting to do more. What's a third
The
recommendation or
third
practice
one
that you
we
support?
so I think it's and I'm probably not going to put this one quite as succinctly, but I think there is something about, once you can do something in one context, you can do it in another.
Mm,
So in the context of noticing kindness, I think what can be really useful is if you think, actually, I'd like to notice more. If you think about the examples where you are already seeing kindness, then that can help you to identify where you might find more. So it might be that you often see kindness in a particular setting, or
mm.
you often see kindness when you're with a particular friend. So when you're next out with that friend, you can look again more actively. Or when you're feeling a particular, it might be that actually you always seem to see kindness when you're feeling hungry. It might not, it might be a different feeling, but whatever it is, so that can really help you, if you're somebody who likes process, for example, and likes things to be a bit more structured, that's kind of a way that your brain works, and that's what works for you. Then that can be a way of identifying kind of what's your structure for noticing these things, and then it will become easier the more that you do it. So yeah, that's not a very succinct tip, is it? But I think
No.
that's a practice that can be useful.
Yeah, I would name that as something like exercise or skill building,
Mm.
that practice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
If you repeat it, if you do the reps, you're going to build the
yeah,
muscle,
yeah.
right?
Exactly. And in a work setting, it might be that you always happen to see kindness in a particular team setting, or with a particular colleague, or
Hmm.
whatever. So you can kind of replicate that. And talking about teams, actually, one of the things that comes up quite a lot, when I talk to when I work with teams, they say, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to start our team meetings by sharing a story of kindness, because that
Hmm.
automatically brings in that positive energy and that positive element. You still probably, well, you still will have the agenda to go through. You'll
Yes.
still have the difficult operational stuff that needs dealing with, but you'll all be doing that from a more positive, upbeat starting point. If you have just taken the time at the start of the meeting for somebody, it could be everybody, or just even one person, say, oh, I saw some great kindness on the way into work today. Somebody let me out of a side road. And I don't know, do you have that in America? I don't know if you have such small side roads where you let people out.
We do. They're probably not as prominent given our car dependence, but yes. We'll have like
Absolutely.
alleys and
Whatever the equivalent is
yes.
of something positive that's happened on the journey
Hmm.
into work or something,
Yeah. Somebody
just
let me into
start.
traffic is
Yeah.
significant to us.
And that happens more. Well, certainly I get more stories about that than you might
Hmm.
expect. And that is a good example of a narrative that people have that, other drivers are always selfish and nobody will let us do
Right.
anything. And yes, of course there are drivers that are like that, but actually positive kind of letting you out in the traffic, that kind of thing, that happens more often than we imagine it to.
Yeah. There's a parallel skill there, I think, perspective taking. Am I
Yeah.
thinking about what other people are going through?
Yeah.
Maybe this person didn't let me into traffic because they're running late. Maybe their kid was sick and they had a bad start to the day.
Yeah.
So I will, instead of calling them bad names, I will just wait for my turn.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. And it's beneficial to you too as well, because where are you going to put your energy? Are you going to
yes.
put your energy on getting cross and ranting and raving, or are you going to put your energy on something a bit more positive that has a benefit for you as well as those around you?
Yeah. Another thing I like about that practice of let's start with a kind story, a kindness story, is that it opens people up to connect with purpose and meaning, whether
Yeah.
it's individual or organizational. I know that you've done a lot of nonprofit communications with my healthcare background. Mission connection, value connection has always been pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But that's not the case for every industry, company, or team. So something like sharing an act of kindness, observed or done, it can be a way to have people thinking more about what's my why, what are we here for, what are we trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and it's a connection thing again, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's the way. So if you're not connecting over a kind of a bigger mission or vision or whatever, actually you're connecting over basic humanity.
Right?
It's something we've all got in common. So
Yeah.
that can be a great place to start.
Love that. Love it, love it, love it. Um, I have had a question pending in my head for probably 15, 20 minutes now. You told us that you started on Instagram. Do you remember the first story of kindness that you shared?
Oh, now you're asking.
I know it's been 4 years. That's a lot.
No, would be my
Okay.
honest answer.
Okay.
I don't remember the first. I think one of the early ones um, was, and actually it's one of those kind of where do you put your focus things. Actually, it was a friend of mine who had been to a shopping mall. Lots of the doors are broken, so there was only one set that were working, and there was
Mm.
an older lady trying to come out, and she kept trying to come out, and people were streaming in, and she couldn't get out. She had to keep stopping with her little walker, and then my friend did stop and let the lady come out. And I really like that one, and I talk about it quite a lot because it would be easy to focus on all those people who didn't stop,
Mm-hmm.
and yet one person did. So that she only needed one person to stop and let her out actually and show her that kindness. So I don't know how early on that was, but that was fairly early. But
Mm-hmm.
that's intriguing. Now you've made me think, oh, I'm going to go and have a look and
No,
see where did we start.
I'm gonna have to go look too. What is the most recent story that you've shared?
Again. Yeah,
I know it's not
my,
a fair question because it's
my
asking you to remember.
luxury my luxury, one of my ways of being kind to myself is that I was a social media manager, and she is absolutely brilliant. For because she is so much. So I spent that first year playing with it on Instagram myself,
Mm-hmm.
and then when I thought actually I need to start taking this a bit more seriously or whatever, I got Alexis involved as my social media manager. So I don't always know what the latest one is, but I know, and I don't know if she's published it or not yet, but one that is about to come out, if it hasn't already gone up, I'm part of a group coaching
Mm.
set, and we meet once a week online, and coach each other and help each other with kind of business challenges and so on. And I was we're on screen, so we're all in different places, and I'm looking at my camera thinking, oh, I look a bit pale and pasty today. I really need to sort out my lighting on my camera. And one of the others in the group said, "Oh, I've got this amazing little, effectively a ring light, but like a little a light gizmo gadget thing." So
Mm-hmm.
she was holding that up, showing it to the rest of us. And again, so I've kind of used that one as a brilliant example of that kind of sharing tips and recommendations
Yes.
with each other. It can be again a really really small thing, and many people would say, just what you do, but it is a kindness, to
Hmm.
help someone in that way.
Yeah. One of our family rules, if you will, um, is an outgrowth of the fact that my husband was a Boy Scout, and an
Uh,
Eagle Scout. And then he was a Scoutmaster, so the Boy Scouts, it's a big part of sort of our family culture.
uh-huh.
And it's do that good turn daily. Find one act of kindness to do, one way to help somebody else. Because you just don't know what people need, right?
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? And it's over here we have a lot of WhatsApp groups that were set
Mm.
up road by road during COVID with for people to help out, and actually those have carried on.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of years, pretty much everyone now can go get their shopping, get their prescriptions, and do all the rest of it. But actually, we've still got a lot of those road groups where neighbours can do exactly that and help each other out.
Oh, wonderful. What are some key takeaways that you'd like listeners to have from the conversation?
Yeah, so key takeaways, I think, are probably the things I've repeated a lot. So one is that kindness is powerful because it connects us as human beings. Um, I want people to know that there is a lot of kindness in the world. We just don't talk about it enough yet. And then following on from that, it would be great if we can all make that conscious effort to look out for more of that kindness that is there already and talk about it, because I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really key, is that it's great for us to notice it and that has a powerful impact, and then if we also talk about it, tell other people, then that spreads that conversation and that tries to change or begins to change that narrative that we all have about our world and ourselves within it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that would be my key points.
Thank you. I think something I've learned from you, Sarah, is that we have the opportunity to train or retrain ourselves to see even simple choices as acts of kindness. And it
Yeah,
doesn't have to be the big stuff. It can
yeah,
be the simple thing like sharing information, holding a door.
yeah,
And if we are looking for that, it will just accumulate. It becomes kind of a snowstorm for us
yeah,
that all these good things pile up
yeah,
because it is
absolutely.
everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it is that thing of, exactly as you say, once you start to notice, you notice more and more, and it does. There are ways to make it a conscious effort to
Mm-hmm.
start with, to look for things, but the more you do, like any habit, the more you do it, the easier it becomes, and it's not. I'm not asking you to add anything extra to your to-do list. It just becomes part of the way that you are in the world and
Mm-hmm.
what you're seeing.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, you will benefit from it physically, mentally, socially, and you will be able to have greater impact yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's not much better than that.
Indeed.
Excellent. Sarah, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been
Yeah,
great.
me as well. I have that good oxytocin feeling. So that'll carry
Me
me
too.
through the afternoon, and I hope for you through the evening and night.
Indeed.
Thank you again.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for joining me in the comfy chairs. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with others who are passionate about leading and learning. And don't forget, if you have a question for our new Comfy HQ series, I'd love to hear it. Check out the link in the show notes to submit your question and be part of the conversation. Until next time.